Well, glad you're here with us tonight. It's about time for us to begin our study of Mark. We'll be opening up to Mark chapter 10. We will begin around verse 35. As always, we'll kind of remind ourselves of what has been going on and where we are in this gospel. But Mark chapter 10, we are on the road to Jerusalem, and we'll find out what happens right before they reach their destination, getting really close to that final point in this trip. But we'll see what happens in this last part of Mark chapter 10. Before we get into the text itself, let's begin by praying together. Our Almighty God, we're thankful for the time that we have tonight. Thankful that you have blessed us with so much, with this day itself, and with the time we have to study and to worship together. We pray you be with us as we look at your Son's life together. Help us to be more like him. Help us to look more closely at him and to see you through him. Thank you for giving us so much, for giving us these words to live by. Thank you for all those who are here tonight to participate with us. Please be with all of us. We have so many needs. We have so many things we simply could not do without your strength. We ask that you would grant it. We're grateful for this time together, and we ask you would bless us as we study. We pray in Christ's name. Amen. Excuse me. All right, here we are in Mark chapter 10. We've been finding really a threefold series of things, and we're in the kind of the third repetition of that. But we have, after the disciples led by Peter, finally acknowledged to some extent at least, or showed their knowledge to some extent of who Jesus was, with Peter's great confession that he is the Christ. After that point, Jesus has begun predicting his death in Jerusalem, and has done so maybe with a little bit increasing specificity. And after each of those predictions, after each time, he has told the disciples in plain words, with no metaphor, with no cryptic meanings. At each time he has told them what's going to happen. They have responded in some way that shows, yes, they I guess, kind of understand the words he's saying at least. They know a little bit about what that means, but they're showing that they don't really get it, that they don't understand what he's saying. When he talks about the resurrection, they can't really puzzle out what that means or why he's talking about it. When he is mixing that together with all of these appeals to sacrifice, and he's showing them the lengths to which he's willing to go, that he's going to give himself, then immediately, each time, they'll respond in some way that shows that they're not on the same wavelength. They're not willing to do that same thing themselves. They're going to fight over power. They're going to fight over who's the greatest. They're going to tell Jesus, as Peter does in the first case, no, this isn't the way. Don't even talk about that, Lord. You're not going to die. So we have a mixture of them not really getting it, not really seeing what the point is, and not really grasping what Jesus is telling them to do. And yet, as we saw last week in Mark 10, in verse 28, Peter speaks truthfully. We can say almost without reservation, we can say that. Peter speaks truthfully when he says, "We've left all and followed you." That's what the rich young man, remember, was unwilling to do. He was not willing to part with his possessions, with his wealth, and to follow Jesus with no hesitation. Peter says, "Lord, we've done that. We're willing to do that." I say almost without reservation. We can say Peter speaks truthfully because they do have this one thing that they haven't yet left. They do have this one thing that they haven't yet put behind them, and that is this clinging to some kind of power or prestige or some kind of ambition that they all seem to be taken by. And we're going to find that especially being at the centerpiece of the passage starting in verse 35 here. There's this one part that they are lacking. They don't need to sell all their possessions and come and follow him, but they need to truly get into their minds what following Christ is about, what it fully claims on them, and what they need to lay aside in order to do that. So he had predicted for the third and final time in verse 32 that they are, of course, going to Jerusalem. He tells them what is going to happen here. And again, added in maybe a couple of new details in that prediction. Mark, throughout this, has been characteristically silent on many of the details about their journey. He doesn't often tell us, where they are or how long this is all taking. But he has been, as the other gospel writers do, just kind of a thematic movement more than anything else. They're on the road to Jerusalem in general because that's the very important part they're going to reach, because Jesus dies in Jerusalem. But in verse 35, again, on the heels of each one of these predictions, we have the disciples showing that they're unwilling to get out of an old and misguided way of thinking. So James and John, the sons of Zebedee, immediately come to Jesus and say, first of all, not what their favor is, not what they want from Jesus, but that simply we want something, and we want you to agree to give it to us. And as we said last week, I don't know why this, or how almost, I don't know why this comes up immediately after what Jesus has told them. The same way I don't understand how they could be arguing about who's going to be the greatest the last time he predicted that he's going to be killed. I don't know why these thoughts would occupy so much of their minds when Jesus is telling them something so serious that has nothing to do with that. Nevertheless, that's what they're dwelling on right now. They want, in verse 37, to sit one on your right hand and the other on your left in your glory. This is their idea. Presumptuous, of course, to ask for that blank check, first of all, in their request. And maybe we'd say that they're putting Jesus in the middle is their way of thinking that they are showing him honor. And to an extent it is. This is where the prominent person is arranged. This is where you would put the master, the king, the ruler. They're not asking for the first position themselves. They are aware that Jesus does belong in that spot and that we would derive our importance by our proximity to him. So if we're looking for things in their favor, we'd say at least that of them, that they recognize his priority, I guess, his preeminence in all of this, but they're still not really grasping what it is to be in his kingdom or to be great in his kingdom. They're still thinking on these very human terms. But that's their request. They want to be at the right and at the left. Jesus' response in verse 38 is almost, it's a pretty light rebuke, isn't it? He doesn't just immediately flame them. He doesn't just immediately, tell you guys, you are idiots, you're misguided, this is so foolish, I can't believe we're talking about this. That immediate response is just to say, you don't know what you don't know what you're asking really. You don't really know what you're talking about. And links this to, I think there's something to the idea that he links these two concepts together. Nearness to Christ, power or a position of some kind in the kingdom is linked to what, based on his response? How might that be gauged, or how might that be kind of given out almost? How would that be decided? Okay, that's where he gets to in a moment, the idea that he's looked at several times before as well, the idea of being the servant of all, being the least. That's how you become the greatest. That's how you become first. Heather? It's not the Son's decision to make. It's evidently God's. He says, it's not mine to give. It's not mine to dole that out. But the question he asks in verse 38, are you able to drink the cup that I drink and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with? What's he talking about there? David? Suffering. So, again, it's not a direct, one-to-one. If you want to be great, you got to go through the worst stuff. If you want to be on the right hand and the left, then it's going to be, just a competition to see who endures the most suffering. That is not what he's saying, but for some reason, there is some kind of link that he makes in answering that question in this way. You want to be greatest? You want to be at the right and the left? You want the positions of greatest prominence in my kingdom when I come into my glory? And he immediately then says, you don't know what you're asking. Can you do this? Can you do these things? So there is some kind of connection between those two. What you are willing to suffer, what you are willing to endure. And again, putting it in those terms, we can understand what he's saying there. You're able to drink the cup that I drink. A lot of times we have some kind of connection maybe between the cup of God's wrath or just kind of, a lot of our songs will talk about drinking the bitter cup, and people still use that a lot of times. Maybe today we'd use an illustration or a metaphor of like drinking bitter medicine or something. Kind of a similar feeling. Drinking the cup is having this suffering poured into you. You're drinking the cup. Baptized with the baptism that I'm baptized with. That's kind of an interesting turn of phrase as well. The idea of almost being immersed in suffering. And once again, an idea that we look at, we say baptized by fire sometimes if we're talking about someone going through a really challenging trial, but it's the idea of being thrown in. It's the idea of being inundated. The idea of being, in over your head almost, but being baptized. You're being inaugurated into this specific calling to a task, but you're doing so in a way that puts you all the way in, that quite literally buries you. It puts you all the way down. So he's asking them, can you do that? Are you willing to do that? And they say, oh yeah. Yeah, you got it. Once again, speaking truly without knowledge, but looking for ways of defending them and saying, okay, here's the silver lining, here's the good with the bad. Have to admire their moxie, their courage. Again, not knowing if they knew or what they understood Jesus was talking about even. A lot of the disciples make claims to this effect that say, whatever we're called on to do, we're going to do it. We're willing. We're there. So yes, we can do that. Now the interesting thing about that statement, of course, and what Jesus goes on to say in verse 39 and verse 40, indeed, drink the cup that I drink, and with the baptism I'm baptized with, you will be baptized. All right, what's he saying here? What's this first part of his answer indicating? Doug?
You will suffer. You will experience things that I'm getting ready to do. Yeah, and they would likely be martyred also.
Okay. James will read about in Acts 12. He's in fact going to be the first one of the apostles. If we're looking at it on that level of saying, drinking a cup of suffering, drinking a cup that means I don't walk out of the room alive, James is going to do it. He's going to do it all the way. If you look at it as, inaugurating yourself into a life of sacrifice where you are willing to part with everything, your health, your safety, your riches, your family, whatever it might be, you're willing to lose all for the sake of Christ, they're definitely going to do that. We don't know what happens with John at the end of his life. Of course, there are long-standing, very old traditions about him maybe being the only one of the apostles who dies of old age and living to a very, very old age. Seems likely that is the case. We don't know what happens with him, but he lives a life of sacrifice and turmoil and suffering. He's probably exiled a couple of times, punished by political authorities. So, to that extent, they say we're able, and he says you will, but we also understand right from the beginning that there is a key difference, if in nothing else than what Jesus will say by verse 45, the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. no matter what else happens, no matter what form it takes or what it looks like, if someone was put through exactly the same tortures that Jesus was and crucified in exactly the same way, if they even used the same planks of wood, it would not be the same as what happens to Jesus, because he is giving his life a ransom for many. So they will not and cannot. When they say in verse 39, we are able to do what you are doing, they are not able to do what Jesus is doing. They can be called upon to be conformed to that suffering, to take on the image of it in some way, as he calls all his followers to do, but it will not truly be the same. They will, but they can't do what Jesus will do because of its effect, because of its effect on others, the salvation that is brought to everyone else through this. He's giving his life a ransom for many. But that key distinction aside, he is telling them, you might think that's true, that you can do what I'm about to do, and it might even be kind of true that you'll face some of the things that I will and die just as I am going to die as well. But as we've already alluded to, his statement in verse 40 says, all of this assigning of ranks and roles and everything, that's not my department. I'm not interested in doing that. That's not for me to decide who's on the right and left. That role is simply for those for whom it is prepared. Gary?
He doesn't exclude them from those seats. He just says
That's
there
true.
is a class of people that will be faithful and be able to have those seats, and they could be them.
That's true. This answer isn't a no, is it?
Right.
It's not him saying, we're going to go a different direction. It's simply saying, that's not up for me, not up to me to decide. But as Gary points out, he is describing here and elsewhere, I think in other places especially, kind of a class of people that will and that do occupy those places. A lot of irony building up, or maybe foreshadowing, I guess we'd say, here as well in chapter 10. When they're talking about their question in verse 37, in your glory we want to be at the right and the left, and how Jesus connects this to his suffering, to drinking the cup, and to going through what he is going to Jerusalem to go through. There will be one on his right and one on his left. There will be people occupying those positions. Won't be James and John, because that's not going to be for them right now. But there will be two men who are in those positions at that time. Maybe James and John, looking at that scene playing out, wondered before if John, who might have been the only disciple to go back and be there at the foot of the cross seeing what was going on, would this kind of conversation replay as he is looking at Jesus dying, having a different kind of glorification than they had in their minds when they were going to Jerusalem, when they're entering into the city as chapter 11 depicts, and everything seems to be going great. But now seeing the Son of God glorified in that way, would that call to mind, boy, I asked him once to be at his right hand, and I'm glad I'm not right now. Now I see what that might look like, what that truly could entail. But they say for now, they say we're able. Yes, we're there to do that. And Jesus says, maybe, maybe not. But it won't be my decision. We'll let that all play out as it will. Gary?
If we look back to what Jesus said in John 17 in the pastoral prayer, that he wanted to have the glory that he had been divested of with his Father.
Yeah.
And I don't know, but it seems to me that was what he emptied himself of. That's spoken of in Philippians 2. So he wanted that back, and he would rightfully have it.
Yeah, and that John's gospel really does look at that idea of him being glorified and when or how, through what process does that take place? And Jesus connects it to that moment, really, connects it to that scene on the cross is where the Father will glorify him again, and he will glorify the Father through that. Yeah, Karina.
I feel like we see that human element come back in even with the questioning of, I'm doing something for you, what do I get?
Yeah.
And Christ, just his perfection all around, but then in the ways and the words that he chooses, once again, I mean, yeah, you get exactly what I get, but he doesn't say he says it's not mine to give. So in other words, he puts it on someone else, and of course they don't fully understand that. And so it comes full circle of, yes, you will get something, but like you said, it's not what they were expecting, but he puts them in their place all at the same time, because he's been reminding and teaching them this whole time is, don't expect something from people. You are the ones to be giving. Don't expect something. And so he's reminding them again.
Yeah, why are you in this? Why are you, what are you hoping to gain is kind of a question we can picture the disciples asking themselves often. And Jesus implicitly asking many people who would follow him that same thing. Why? What do you hope to accomplish? What do you hope to receive from this? And it does tie back to that question or the statement that Peter made, we've left all, and yes, they have, and yes, they kind of understand why, but what's really going to be the end result of that? They're still learning. They're still finding out. Steve?
I think this passage also tells us that Jesus doesn't always give us what we ask for.
Yeah.
You know, if you ask amiss with improper motives and things, then God's wisdom won't give it to you.
That's true. It's not a grant of every favor, even after saying, well, tell me what it is, and I don't know if that's right for you. Let's wait and see. So the other 10 here in verse 41, and once again, I don't know exactly why they are as upset as they are. I have, I guess we'd have maybe two primary theories. When they heard, they were greatly displeased with James and John. If we want to be charitable to the 10, then we'd say they were angry because what a foolish thing for anyone to be asking for or arguing about at this point. And I mean, guys, Jesus just told us that when we get to Jerusalem, he's going to be killed. Can't we think about that instead? Can't we put our minds, focus more on that than what the rankings are going to be among us? So he'd say maybe they are mad because James and John have their eyes on the wrong thing. I'm more inclined to think, based on the portrayal the disciples have had up to this point, that it's more an idea of, man, I wish we'd thought of that. And, they beat me to it. I'm upset that they kind of got in before I did, and they're gonna scoop me. They're gonna get to the place that I wanted. I don't want James and John to be right and left because I want to work my way in there. I want Peter to be first, or Andrew, or whoever else it is. Whatever their reasoning, they're upset at this, of course. And so Jesus realizes, of course, he needs to expound more on why this is the wrong line of thinking, why this is the wrong line of questioning and favor asking. So in verse 42, gathers them around. Let's huddle up. Need to talk to all the disciples. And tells them essentially, and Steve mentioned this a moment ago, getting back to the same idea that he's looked at before of being first and last, being greatest or least. And how is this all decided in the kingdom? He connects it, first of all, to, by contrast, the rulers of the Gentiles, the rulers of the nations. Probably has in mind, the Romans, the occupying powers, and how they order their affairs. Well, when someone has that kind of power, what does Caesar do with his power? whatever Caesar wants, and he has a great time doing it. And if he wants to hear this kind of music, then he finds a musician who does that, and he brings him in. If he wants to feast for 2 weeks, then he feasts for 2 weeks. If he wants this guy to be thrown in prison, then that guy's in prison. If he wants this guy dead, then that guy's dead. If he wants his horse to be a consul, then his horse is a consul. If he wants to do anything, he's going to do it. And people suffer or succeed based on his whim, and everybody knows that about him. And he makes sure that they know that about him and about their relationship to him. He lords it over them. And that's how many of their governing powers are. That's how many governing powers throughout world history up to and including today operate. I want to be the big man in charge, not so that I can have the best outcome for as many people as possible, but so that I'll be powerful and everyone else will know and everybody else will come to me begging and scraping for favor and making me feel important and letting me know that I'm getting what I want. That's how the world exercises authority. But, he says in verse 43, that's not what it's like in the kingdom. In verse 43, that's a present tense verb that he uses. I really don't like this. The New King James translation here in verse 43, it shall not be so among you. Not that there's anything wrong with that statement. What Jesus says is, it is not that way among you. He isn't giving them here a kind of model for behavior. It's not a future tense. It's not a prospective hypothetical idea of it shouldn't be that way. You guys shouldn't act that way. Try to avoid that. He's stating in certain terms, in unequivocal terms, it is not this way among you. That is not what my kingdom is like. That's the reality of things. It's a present reality. He's not giving them an ideal behavior model. He's describing the truth of the kingdom, that it's not that way with us. Likewise, in verses 43 and 44, and we've talked about this very similar idea earlier, when he speaks there of whoever desires to be great among you shall be your servant, whoever desires to be first shall be slave of all, is not really the idea of what might happen as a punishment of some kind. It is instead looking at, I think must would be a better idea there, of not saying it shall be this way, as though if you want to be great, then the consequences of that will be you end up having to become someone's servant. If you want to make a name for yourself, then the penalty for that is you end up getting kicked all the way down to the bottom and you're the least of all. No, he is instead giving the blueprint. He's showing the way forward. He's saying this is what must happen. This is what you must do, what you have to do if you desire to be first. I'm not telling you you shouldn't want to be first in the kingdom. I'm just telling you here's how you do it. You serve everyone else. You become the least. You look out for your brother first. You look out for the person next to you and then worry about yourself. You make yourself the servant of all. You make yourself the least, and that puts you at my right hand, so to speak. That puts you in the position you're wanting to occupy. Quit thinking about yourself. Quit thinking about becoming this great man and figure out how things are ordered in the kingdom, which is greatness through sacrifice, greatness through service, greatness through love for your brother. It has to be this way. And his rationale, his logic for that in verse 45 is going to be he says, because, to explain this, to illuminate you on why this is the case, for even the Son of Man didn't come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. This is one of Mark's key statements. It's found in the other Gospels as well, or in Matthew at least, but a key idea for Mark to point out here. He has been so focused on Jesus' activity, what he does, much more so than what he says, and he's been portraying Jesus in this way, as someone who performs acts of service, who does things that are useful to people, who does things that are good. He does good works. He's been portrayed already as a servant, as the servant. And he says, that's what I've come to do. That's what I've doing. That's what I'm going to do for the rest of the time that I'm here. Why would you all think? Why would you have a different estimation of how everything else will be ordered or ranked? Why would you think you become great through a different means than what I'm doing? I am the Son of God. I am God Himself. And my greatness, my glorification comes through me sacrificing my very life for all of these people that I will ransom through this great, chief, ultimate act of service that I will perform. Why would you be great through doing anything else? Why would you have a position of authority or prominence that's based on some other criteria? This is what the Son of Man does. This is what I came to do. It's the same for you guys. So figure it out and start living that way. N.T. Wright discusses it this way. He says, because the cross is God's way of putting the world and ourselves to rights, it challenges and subverts all the human systems which claim to put the world to rights, but in fact succeed only in bringing a different set of humans out on top. The reason James and John misunderstand Jesus is the same reason why many subsequent thinkers down to our own day are desperate to find a way of having Jesus without having the cross as well. The cross calls into question all human pride and glory. And I think that's exactly right. We are, by that I mean James and John, are still not understanding and probably would still have this argument with Jesus about, I'm going to Jerusalem to die. They still don't understand. They still don't like that idea. They're still uncomfortable with this idea. They still don't get it. But that's the necessary part to all of this, to show the true way forward, to show how the world actually does become right. That's what Jesus is going to accomplish. He's going to give this willing ransom, paid to deliver, to free the many. All right, anything else here to mention? Comments, questions, anything up through verse 45 that I overlooked? All right. Beginning in verse 46 then, and this is, I think, a great ending account for so many of the things that have come before. It builds on a lot of the ideas that we've been looking at really in the last 3 chapters that have so much to do with discipleship, and it just plays very nicely on a lot of the accounts we've seen right leading up to this. So, verse 46, they have come to Jericho, very close to Jerusalem now. We're maybe on the home stretch of the journey to Jerusalem, and that's how chapter 11 begins, of course. But as they're traveling, there's this blind man, Bartimaeus. He's sitting on the side of the road, begging for his livelihood. We assume he is just making his way through life, kind of by hoping for the mercy of passersby. But on this day, he hears that there's unusual traffic coming by. There's Jesus of Nazareth who is actually on the road today. Bartimaeus seems to have some kind of knowledge of Jesus. The way he speaks to him is impressive, especially by this point in the Gospels, where we've seen human understanding of or identification of Jesus so lacking and so lackluster. But he is going to call out for Jesus, Son of David. That's a messianic title. If nothing else, if he does not really understand more about it than that, that's still a big title to give to somebody, to call a person, to call a man in first century the Son of David. If you're a Jew, that means a lot. And he's giving him a title of great respect, maybe one of great hope. This messianic utterance here, the Son of David, and he cries out for mercy. In verse 51, just to jump ahead quickly to that, he will call him Rabboni, which is a term, we rarely find it in the Bible, but is a term used often in prayers, written prayers that we know of from the time and from, I guess, a little bit before, but it's an epithet that is used frequently of God himself. It's not a title you really give to men with any frequency whatsoever. It means literally, it's my great one. He is calling him there, my great one. But it's a term that the Jews used with some regularity to speak of God himself when they might be praying to him. So again, I don't know exactly what Bartimaeus thinks or knows about Jesus, but the two ways that he refers to him, the two titles he uses, say a lot more than we've seen almost anyone, save Peter and the other 11 in that one instance where they finally say, we believe you're the Christ. Bartimaeus seems to know that as well, and he seems to be inching forward towards really understanding who Jesus is, what his nature is. But he is here begging on the road, and amazingly, although he is making a big racket, and I like this story because it kind of makes us think about our, at least for me, kind of our own sense of decorum and propriety, and we don't really want to call attention to ourselves when we are worshiping God. We don't really want to call attention to ourselves when we are doing something that has to do with our religion. And yes, I understand there's wisdom in that, and I understand as Jesus would say about that himself, for instance, about not trying to make a show, not trying to do things to be seen by men. But I also then look at an account like this where a man is, quite frankly, is making himself really obnoxious to everyone around him, saying, Jesus, please, right over here, listen to me. I can't see you. I don't know exactly where you are, but I think you're nearby. That's what it sounds like based on what everybody else is doing. Come over here and please see me. Please talk to me, to the point where everybody else around him is going, would you knock it off, please? And I have to just think of how loud you would have to be. Mark has always been, he's been consistent in depicting Jesus traveling anywhere he goes with a lot of people around. The multitude. You remember, we have charted that in some of our classes before, seeing the way that Mark talks about the people pressing together so much the disciples couldn't even eat at one point because there were so many people crowding around. You can't get inside a house when he's inside a house. You can't even all crowd around a beach. When he's on a beach, he's got to get in a boat and go out into the middle of the water. There's a ton of people around, milling around, talking to each other, talking to Jesus, crying out for Jesus, bringing people who are probably sick and moaning with pain. There's animals walking back and forth because we're traveling at one of the most busy times of year on one of the busiest roads in this area, going from Jericho to Jerusalem right around Passover season. There's a lot going on. How much noise is this guy having to make where people around him are going, good grief, man, calm down, be quiet? Because this is not a quiet, they're not walking through a library when this is going on. But he's making a big fuss of all this. He really desperately wants Jesus to take notice of him. I don't know. I find that really appealing, to have that lack of self-consciousness, that lack of, I don't care what anybody else thinks right now, really. I need the Lord, and I need him to be aware of me. And I'm going to see if I can accomplish that no matter what. But amazingly, with all of that in mind, as I've just said, this is, not a quiet little place that they're going through. Jesus hears him and is aware of this, and is aware of one individual among who knows how many people would have been around at this point, sees this one man who does really need him right now. He says, bring him over. Bring Bartimaeus to me. And they say, okay, you made your point. He's agreed to go see you. Just be quiet and get over there and let's finish this up. And so Jesus asks him in verse 51 the same question, really verbatim, that he had asked James and John back in verse 36. You want a favor? What do you want? What do you want me to do for you? Same question. He gets a very different answer. Or gives a very different answer, I guess. They said, we want to be on top. We want to be at the right and the left. We want to be in the positions of power. And this man says, I just want to see. I just want to be able to see. Jesus tells him, go your way. Your faith has made you well. As we talked about last week, literally the statement there is, your faith has saved you. And immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus on the road. This is, yes, it works on its own as a miracle that proves the power of Jesus, but I find a lot of symbolism or metaphorical significance, or whatever you want to say, with what's going on here. And just the differing ends that we have to two stories where Jesus is being asked for a favor, where he's being asked for something that is needed. This man who is sat on the road begging ends the story in verse 52 on the road following Jesus. Not on the side of the road begging for help, but now on the road walking with Jesus. His physical sight now matches the vision of his faith that Jesus says he definitely, which has saved him, which has healed him. What would we call this guy by the end of this passage in verse 52? He's a disciple. He's following Jesus. He's doing what the other guys have been doing. So I guess if we get down to it, if we ask it a different way, what's he really asking Jesus for in verse 51? What do you want me to do for you? He's kind of saying, put differently, he's saying, give me what I need to be able to follow you. Give me what I need so that I can be a disciple. Maybe you'd say, yeah, he could do that if he's blind, but maybe not. I don't know. It's a lot easier if you can see where you're going to walk on the road, isn't it? Give me what I need so that I can follow you, because that's exactly what he ends up doing as soon as he can. So for this passage, this longer passage, again, kind of going back to the end of chapter 8, where we've had all of this instruction about what it means to be a disciple, what it means to be a follower of Jesus, what it requires, what it demands, what you got to give up, what you got to see, what you got to be willing to do. And we've seen within it and right before it several other references to people who need to be able to see. They need to be able to see clearly. They want to be able to see all the way. They want to have their ears open so that they can hear. But at the end of all of this, we get a very pure, a very clear image of discipleship, which comes to Jesus simply saying, I have faith and I want to follow you. Will you give me the rest so that I can do that? And that's exactly what happens, and we end up with exactly what we want. Some man who's following Jesus. Nathan. Yeah.
They should be. They had all the advantage to be. They weren't. Bartimaeus, somehow he was like Jesus, right? And you see his actions. And I don't think it's a coincidence here that this man, he's a blind beggar. He is the lowest of the social order.
Yeah.
This guy gets it. And Jesus is saying, this is the guy that you need to be. This blind beggar. He gets it. So for me, humility, right? Be humble. If I think I'm somebody, clearly I can miss the boat here, because here's this perfect example of the kind of person that I should be. And again, it's not a wealthy individual, it's not the best friend of Jesus, it's a blind beggar.
Yeah. No, very, very good points, and I agree with that depiction. I mean, this guy is, and I think Mark has put this account in this place largely for that purpose. After all discussions about discipleship and bringing this era of Jesus' ministry to a close right before the triumph. This is what it's meant to look like. This is what a disciple really does. And with the questions that we find mirroring each other in verse 36, verse 51, you're left with that question for ourselves, which do we want to be? Which attitude are we coming into things with? When Jesus asks, what do you want me to do for you? Are we saying, well, I want to I want to make sure this is going to be worth my while. I want to be recognized for what I'm doing. I want to have a little prestige. I want people to know me. I want some assurances. I want to be on your right and your left. I want to be positioned in the best place possible for myself. Or do we say simply, as we've kind of colored his request, "Give me what I need to follow you"? And Bartimaeus has that. Ends up being this great picture of discipleship. And so we'll pick up, actually, in a couple of weeks. I'll be out of town next week. We're going down to Houston. So in a couple of weeks, we'll start in Mark chapter 11. Good stopping point for now, I guess, but I'll be looking forward to getting back into it. We'll stop there.